our Nova Sutras daily discussion. And just to put us in the right space here. So the intention with these is to create a welcoming space where we're going to have productive conversations about how to get through what's going on in a way that's really earth honoring. And in order to do that, hopefully you've all seen these before, pretty sure, but we do have our discussion agreements. And so just a reminder that the intention here is to listen very respectfully, give full attention, respect for all different points of view, assume that everybody's coming in with their best intentions. And as you're speaking, be as honest and authentic as you can. Stories and specifics. On these recorded sessions, we're going to be posting them on YouTube. So be aware of that as you're speaking. And if you want us to pause the recording, please let us know. So that's that.
Oh.
And then,
No.
I think we should do another sort of round of getting into the space. So as an initial check-in, again, we'd like to start with some gratitude or appreciation. And for a little guidance to help us connect with the more than human world, I invite you to say something that you're grateful for that doesn't have to do with people and the things that we make and do. So for instance, today I've been very grateful for just the sound of rain.
And I am always grateful when I'm sitting out in the backyard here and having a conversation and the little hummingbird pops in and makes himself known. And hummingbird is one of my power animals. So it's always good to have that reinforcement from nature that, yeah, you're doing the right thing there.
I'll start picking on people. Francesca, go ahead.
I'm grateful for just the richness of our conversations, which are directing me towards certain kinds of reading and watching things and informing others, which I wouldn't have had otherwise. I'm also grateful for this thing. I taught it to the Quakers this morning.
Oh, nice.
Great.
Did I understand we didn't want to talk about interactions with people that we're grateful for? Or?
That was my suggestion, but
Yeah, as close to I remember seeing a bloom or a creature today, I gave some money to a homeless person, making it turn into Safeway. But otherwise, for the day, I think Paul and I had a really good discussion, really good, very specific, after our first meeting. And I'm very grateful for that. It gives me a lot more of a sense of structure, at least between us, about some things I think we want to tackle. So I'm very grateful for that. And as always, I'm grateful for the rain. If it's foggy, raining, I'm the one who enjoys it. And everybody's going, I'm sick of this. So.
I can't believe how much I enjoyed the sound of the rain today. It was just so compelling, so present all day. It reminded me of when I first moved, having grown up in California, moved to Boston, where I then lived 15 years. and they could never understand how thrilled I was with rain. For them, it was always an intrusion in whatever their plans were. And for me, it was, I tried to explain, our spring comes when the rains begin in the fall and everything finally turns green. So the seasons have shifted around a bit since then, quite a bit actually. But after all those years of drought, I'm so grateful.
And welcome, Nightingale. We're going around and doing a little check-in, asking for gratitude in the non-human world.
I'll go. I've been inside all day, but I can see out my window. There's a really tall redwood in our backyard, and that and a lot of bamboo. And that with the rain just feels very fresh. And also I like when it's overcast and rainy, it just feels cozier being inside. Rather than looking out and seeing a beautiful sunny spring day.
You're not out in, yeah.
And the other thing is, just a little while ago, I was holding my cat, and she was just purring against my neck, and that was another cozy moment today. So that was nice.
Very nice.
I just saw a hummingbird enjoying our lavender. And I'm looking out at bamboo, which is one of my favorite things. I am really grateful for the beauty of the web of life around us, even right here where I am. We were able to get out for a little bit of a hike the other day in Henry Cowell, and that stillness in the woods and the soft feeling the air has. It's just like someone who really likes you, you know, opening the door and saying, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you." Nice.
Thank you, Paul. Nightingale, are you in a position to chime in here?
Yes. So I'm very grateful to be here with you guys today. And I think the thing that I'm thinking about is the fields that are not too far from us where we're staying, and they're just all beautiful, full of long plants with flowers. And some of the birds that we have all noticed are the red-winged blackbirds.
Yeah.
That they're singing away, and they're just very merry at this time. And I also just let 2 people into my house that had gone on a fairly short walk out to that field. It's raining now, but they came back full of laughter because they were all drenched in the rain, which is what they really needed. And their laughter feeds my soul with joy.
Nice, thank you. Okay.
And then before we dive in, can we drop in for a little bit of silence? All right. I'm going to give us our 2 minutes here. welcome back. And I've got everyone muted. If Derek, you're going to go ahead and present. Okay.
So I'm going to share screen. And while I have the share screen up, Michelle, I'm not going to be able to see anybody. So you're going to have to monitor the room and let me know if anything needs to happen. So as I said before, let me find the right screen share. Wanted to start with the economy piece. And this comes out of a podcast given by Chris Martenson. Chris's website is peakprosperity.com. And you can just search Peak Prosperity on YouTube and find his videos. He's been doing a daily video podcast on the virus situation since the end of January. And this particular set of slides comes from his podcast on March 31st. And he was looking at the economic impacts of all of this. And one of the reasons that I wanted to present this is this heading at the top, dare to be ahead of the crowd. I have been very successful doing disaster response, where I know the arc of the response and make sure we're prepared for the next thing that's going to happen, because they tend to be very typical. And so I do try to look ahead and see, where are we headed? Where's this going to end up? How can I get better prepared today for what might happen very soon? And so these next few slides on the economy are presented just for that purpose, so that we can all start to think about what this might look like. And this is all debt, including securities, loans, government, personal, corporate debt, total debt in the US. And you'll notice the scale on the left-hand side is billions of dollars. And so what we're talking about, 10,000, is actually 10 trillion. It's hard to get our head around a trillion. And so I want to give you a quick example so you can start to see the ratio of what we're talking about here. If you start counting seconds, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, it takes you not quite 12 days to count 1 million seconds. So 1 million seconds is like 11.8 days. If you do that 1,000 times, you've counted 1 billion seconds, because 1 billion is 1,000 million. And that turns out to be about 31.4 years. Now, if you do that 1,000 times, you've counted 1 trillion seconds, which is 1,000 billion. And that turns out to be 31,400 years. So the difference between 1 million, billion, and 1 trillion is a difference between 11 days, 31 years, and 31,000 years, or what, 5 times recorded history? And so I like that example because it gives us just an insight, a little inkling into the difference between the numbers. So here we're talking about back in 2008 in the US, we were at about 55 trillion in total debt. Today we're up over 75. And in the normal course of things, the economy has really 2 paths to go. One is to go up, and then if this coronavirus shutdown and the destruction to the economy that's going to happen over the next few months happens to put us into a depression, then clearly the direction would be the other way. What Chris is trying to point out on this next slide is that it's not just the coronavirus that's causing the depression. The depression was going to come sooner or later anyway. The red line down here, the new red line, is gross domestic product. And there's lots of concerns about how that's measured, but in essence, it's trying to measure economic output. And Paul's already made a comment about gross domestic product. I understand that. But in terms of how fast the economy is growing, it's not growing nearly as quickly as our debt. And so our debt is on an exponential curve here, and currently it's 2 times more, 2 times more than our output. And so this is clearly an unsustainable relationship. At some point, yes, the economy normally would go exponential, but that's way out in the future. And so it's not going to save us. The point being, the economy was already in trouble. This might have just been the straw that breaks the camel's back. There's been a lot of talk lately about the stimulus and how the stimulus is going to save the economy. And this was from the Wall Street Journal. It was mid-March. And it talks about how the Federal Reserve rushed to repair disorderly trading conditions in the Treasury market. Disorderly trading conditions. That what I can't even imagine what they mean by that. But the point was, there was an unwinding of the so-called basis trade, and a lot of hedge funds started to lose money. One of them in particular was Citadel. Citadel is a hedge fund who happens to have as their chief macroeconomist a certain gentleman named Ben Bernanke. Now, do you imagine that if Ben Bernanke is working with a hedge fund and all of a sudden the hedge fund starts losing money, he might be able to pick up the phone and get a bailout for his hedge fund from the government for free and have it done by the close of business after he makes the phone call? Absolutely. But is that how things work for the little folk like us? Oh, heck no. We get this $1,200 check, which, by the way, by the time the taxpayers pay for that and all of the other stimulus trillions of dollars that are going to flow out to the economy, we'll probably end up being on the hook of $8,000 or $10,000 per taxpayer for that $1,200 check. And so this is just another way of pointing out how broken the economy is. There's another part that's also broken. Part of the stimulus is about small businesses being able to get loans. They call it the Paycheck Protection Program because they want businesses to continue to pay their employees even though they're not working and the business is closed, so that people can still pay the rent and pay the mortgage. And they announced this program on Monday last week. And the program was the small business applies and gets a loan to cover payroll and a little bit more, like maybe the rent and the utilities too. But the payroll has to be 75% of the loan. And as long as they use that money to do their payroll, to make their payroll, then at the end of 3 months, the government's going to come in and forgive the loan. And so in essence, it is nationalizing payroll. It is making the government pay the payroll. And I'm not going to, the point of the discussion is not to talk about the benefits or the problems with that. What I wanted to bring up is that the banks were handed the job of actually processing the loan applications, and the banks have been pushing back and saying, we don't want to have any part of this. Friday, 2 days ago, was the day that the loan applications were supposed to start being accepted. And people found out that if they went to Bank of America to apply for their loan, Bank of America turned everybody down unless you already had a personal account with them, a business account with them, and a business loan with them. If you did not have all three, Bank of America would not talk to you. And so I'm bringing it up just because, here we go, people who have maybe done the right thing and built their business without loans would be probably the best person to give a loan to without doing a long loan application process if you're just going to throw money into a bank account. And yet those are the people that are not getting the help. And the people who are getting the help who are the ones who've already borrowed money and may not be able to pay that back, and now you're going to give them more on top of that. So this is just an example of how the system is so deeply broken and so deeply skewed towards maintaining the power structures and the economy the way it is today and not making changes. Whole lot of stuff that we can talk about here. But what I really wanted to do then, having prefaced the fact that anything the government does at this point is meant to try to maintain the status quo, I'd kind of like to get into a little discussion about using goals first, strategy later, about the ways that this crisis is going to be used by the dominant culture to maintain that status quo. And I've put down a list of things here. Crisis response in the current totalitarian system is, or becoming more totalitarian. Crisis response equals control. The rich get richer. Isolation, not community. So they're trying to isolate us because divide and conquer has always worked. And so as long as we don't come together as a community, as a grassroots movement, that allows them to continue. So isolation is one of the methods they use. They'd like to get us to stop using cash, because then if all of our money is digital, then it's easy to take away. It's easy to shut off the tap. It's easy to start charging negative interest rates and take your money away from you. All kinds of stuff that cash prevents. But we were seeing, I go to restaurants and they say, we don't take cash anymore, it's gotta be plastic. And so that's one of the ways they're using to limit our freedoms. They're now instituting no free assembly. They're limiting our free speech. Accounts are being deleted on social media for saying the wrong things. It's easy to see vaccinations becoming mandatory. Oh, you can't get a driver's license without proof of your vaccination. That brings up all kinds of issues. They're trying to get us used to viewing and not participating in not only sports events. That's the easy one. That's the one that makes sense when people are afraid. Oh yeah, it makes sense that you don't have games that I can go actually cheer for. Getting us to view and not participate is again another way to limit our free speech and keep us isolated and not feeling our communal power. Controlling access, not only access to the roads, but access to media, access to news, access to truth. They also define truth and let us know what's acceptable to say, and it's usually used in a very self-serving manner. They prefer us when we're distracted or self-medicated. Our current health paradigm is based on using drugs and surgery, as opposed to maintenance and non-invasive solutions to health problems. Our system of conflict resolution is based on a gun or a bomb. Almost all of our media that programs people's thinking, if there's a conflict, you reach for a gun or a bomb and solve it. We don't have good role models in our media on a regular, consistent basis about how you have a conversation with someone and talk it out. COVID-19 is also a very convenient enemy because it's invisible, and we can fight that better than we can fight invisible issues like climate and racism. And if COVID-19 being invisible can be the focus and generate the fear, then all these other things become possible much more easy. And it's just a way to keep us under the corporate thumb. And so what I was proposing was that we start to envision what a response might be to all of these different issues. And if you want to add some issues to the list, happy to do that. I've got this to where I can edit it, and so I can start to add in what people say, what the comments are. But my proposal was to start envisioning what is the answer, where do we go from here, what do we want to see 3 months from now, what are the conversations we should be having at this point to start to address and respond and create alternatives to what I think is in our immediate future. So with that, let's open things up, and I'd like to hear some questions or responses or something.
Okay. First of all, Benny and Leoma have come on.
Oh, nice. Welcome.
And do you want to stop sharing the screen for a moment so we can all see each other? And Benny, I'm going to unmute you first.
Hello.
Hi. And
Hi.
as we had come on earlier, we invited everyone to check in with just a moment of gratitude or appreciation for something in the more than human world.
I am endlessly grateful for the mycorrhizal network of the biosphere. So much wisdom and adaptability and nurturing that I always appreciate to discover portions of it fruiting and cultivate it when I can.
Nice.
Wonderful. And then Leoma, here you go.
Just grateful for the rain.
And Leoma, I'm curious, could you give us an update on your sister?
Yeah.
Fortunately, a bad knee sprain, but no broken bones.
Oh, thank
So
you.
she's back home, and I've basically been helping her ice, and some friend has come in and spent a lot of time helping her. And
Oh, that's fantastic news.
So that's good news. And so.
Okay. So before we dive back in, comments, questions?
And just, you can either just put your hand up by the screen or use the Zoom tool and put your hand up, and I will call on you. So Bob, and then Nancy, and then Paul. And Bob, there you go.
You know, I really have a very difficult time with 34 trillion. There's just a really huge sense of unreality about a lot of this. Maybe I just have unhelpful contempt or something for a lot of the business as usual. It seems to me that the real resources are, we know what the real resources actually are. And they're the earth, they're the thing we're trying to save as well as ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the real richness. That's the real thing. I don't know
Real
where
wealth.
34 trillion in a hedge fund. I don't know what the hell that is. I mean, I'm expressing my ignorance as well as my kind of my frustration with that whole model. I think a lot of us think that we really have to get down to some serious living in terms of living within our means. And some of these things, some of these abstractions are just, they're almost like art. You know, it's like weird modern art. It's like, I might like it, I might not. It doesn't seem, sometimes I don't know that it really moves me, this whole money thing. I think it's you had the list of things to manipulate us, and this is maybe the biggest one in a way. Is oh well, you're not going to get any more money, and a lot of people talking about we need to have parallel structures. It's easy to talk about, and obviously it's very, very hard to do. But I think that's really kind of what's called for, especially after the latest election cycle and stuff. I think a lot of us are thinking, all right, we're sort of back to a local focus, essentially. I won't say I'm giving up on it entirely, but there's just a lot of nonsense going on. And I'd kind of hoped to see the system challenged a lot more than it has. And I don't know who's counting the votes. I don't know if the vote count's even real. So it's kind of along with economics. There's so many things to doubt. The only things we can know is each other, if we can find a way to stay in touch with each other. And I guess I'd take out a loan and say, okay, well, I have 34,000 years to play it back. So that's how I'm going to look at that. When I can put my doughboy pool at Chernobyl and relax for a little bit after the 34,000 years, I guess I'll feel better about everything. But yeah, I don't know. It just seems like kind of a false language or something for all practical purposes, I think.
And then I think Nancy was next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Derek. I'm glad you're raising these questions, and I don't know that I've quite ever heard the numbers laid out against by the time, I was multiplying it a few more after you got past 1 trillion, and it was longer than the history of human beings on this planet by quite a bit. I would like to respond to the query about kind of where we go. One of the primary things we do is we put at least as much effort into learning what is already working around the world. Solutions that are already emerging, that are parallel structures that have the potential of moving into place. You've heard me use the phrase before, I'll say using breakdown to break through. That this collapse has the potential of breaking apart some of these seemingly impossibly powerful structures. And the question is, to what extent are we aware of and able to start making use of alternatives that are already proving themselves? And I would like to offer over the few weeks some knowledge about these things. Keith Runyon and I are working together on some materials, and I would take 3 examples right away. One I put in the chat the first few days that I think I'll just do a 10-minute presentation on, which is how democracy looks in Taiwan right now and how it is responding to the COVID-19 opportunity, if you will. I'm looking also at the rise of co-ops and worker-owned businesses. People here in Santa Cruz recognizing that some 1,200 small businesses will go through retirement within the next few years, and promoting the idea of employees buying out those so that we have employee-owned and co-ops. And a third is the enormous move towards regenerative agriculture and all the different sorts of problems that that solves, and looking and the recently established public banks, the opportunity for public banking in California and so forth. I think to the extent that we're aware of those things, it begins to support our agency, because it isn't just us imagining a better future, it's our actually seeing what is happening that concretely manifests it. The question for me, I'll put it out there, and it's one I'm hoping to get answers from Keith that we're specifically working on, is it's fine to say everything I just said in theory, but to start trying to pin that down. What sorts of collapses can we anticipate? In what areas? Where are the cracks? Where are the leverage points? Where are the things that we can particularly look to that could help create these new opportunities, make them parallel, and then make them the norm? So I'll stop there.
And Paul. Oh.
Got him. Go ahead, Paul.
So what seems really clear to me, that stimulus package was such an obscenity. What seems really clear to me is that if there is going to be a response that minimizes unnecessary suffering, whether it's unnecessary suffering from the virus itself or unnecessary suffering from economic dislocation. And when I say if, I don't actually mean if, right? Because for me, one of the meanings of being human is that I do everything in my power to make sure that we are minimizing needless suffering. Of course I do that. But I think it's interesting to be in an election cycle, you know, where the focus is kind of on what do the candidates want to happen, And I've noticed there are a lot of obvious things that we aren't talking about. And I think we need to change that. So one thing, tangible step that I'm kind of talking myself up into taking is taking a kind of aggressive position with people who are in the Sanders, not me, us movement, who are activists, who are, you know, they're used to be engaging reality directly, to not taking cues from the media, to not assuming that anyone is looking out for anything remotely resembling the public interest. But supporting a good candidate, or, you know, the Justice Democrats running for Congress, I think we're all doing both those things in Not Me, Us, is really not a substitute for sort of just asking questions about how our fellow Americans are doing. So, you know, in Kentucky, people are going out looking for deer because they can't eat. And they're isolated and there's no help. One of the things that we know about depressions from the last one is that unless there's a federal response that provides relief, there generally just isn't relief. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I mean, the farther down you go, the less resources there are to work with. So I would like to invite anyone who's interested to help me make a list. You know, there's different ways of doing this, but since there's going to be another stimulus package, and if we don't demand it, it's very likely that it will omit the same things. I think it would be good to make a list, maybe make a petition that people can sign, but really encourage, like I wanted to encourage Indivisible to have people call, and they kind of have a list, but it's not what I would call very complete. So I'm thinking of things like, stop right this minute immediately. The next stimulus bill has to say, because Trump won't do this, Congress has to do it. It has to say that the charging for rent, the collection of payments for mortgages, and the charging for water, sewer, garbage, power, broadband, cable, all of it, right, in this context is essential. There's not one thing I listed that isn't part of a public health response. We just can't have people going without these things, and we can't have people acquiring massive debt. You know, so even if we had a moratorium on evictions, it is not going to help when people owe 6 months rent, whose incomes I happen to know do not make 1 month's rent easy. So I would like to make a list, and I would like help doing it.
So I'm going to propose we're at that threshold where it might be more productive to have us break into 2 groups to do a little bit deeper conversation. Derek, does that sound like something we ought to try?
That's fine.
Okay.
Could I get a clarity? Derek,
Yes.
You said there was a place you wanted to go to after your presentation that was a slight shift in the direction, I guess, of purposes and strategies.
Well, no, this is the part we're on. This part about how how the system wants to oppress us, and then what responses could we have?
And that's what the small groups would be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
And
and
Michelle, just make sure you and I get in different rooms.
yeah, I can do that. Okay, I see what I see what's going on and where I can move people, and we're good, I think.
And what time do we want to put on this?
That's the next question. So we're at 52 after, so let's give it 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put us into breakout rooms now.
And somebody please take notes. And I'm thinking we should have one more. I think there were 10. Nancy, I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Thanks.
Okay.
Do we have one more in our group?
Well, I thought we were going to, but they're not coming in. So
Yeah.
let's carry on. And do we want to record this, or do we want to pause the recording and keep the recording just to the main group?
Can we record it?
Yeah, it's still recording. I just wanted to check.
Now, does this mean we're recording this group, but the other group going
not the
unrecorded?
other group. Not the other group. And apologies, I just processed that just this moment as I brought it up. So Michelle and I have not done this before, so we've done a breakout session, but only to play. So we'll have to keep that in mind next time we do breakout groups. Okay, so anybody have anything they want to start with?
Well, I'm interested in your opinion, Derek, of the things you were talking about, this type of, this economic crazy tightrope that we're discussing as though it's absolutely inevitable.
Well, I have been putting my focus on talking about the mortgage and the rent situation, because exactly like Paul was saying, the people who are paying rent can't go without a job for 3 months and then catch up on all their rent.
Right.
I mean, that's just not doable.
Yeah.
And from what I know about economies and such, money is actually created by debt. And so when the Federal Reserve is throwing all this money at companies and stimulus packages and all this good stuff, the only way that doesn't just absolutely blow up the money with runaway inflation is if there's a lot of canceled debt, a lot of debt foreclosures, a lot of debt defaults. And so I think they're anticipating that there's going to be that kind of problem, and so they think they can get away with printing a bunch of money. Now, are they going to match the numbers close enough to not have a problem? I doubt it. But I think the more immediate concern is, if you think about people who are going to end up in a situation where they owe lots of money, historically that leads to all kinds of suicides, mental health, depression, spousal abuse, heavy drinking, drug overdoses. I mean, we're not just talking about an economic issue here. We're talking about a social issue and a health issue. And to not be trying to address that proactively with some kind of plan, to me, it just shows the bankruptcy of the whole system, that all it's focused on is keeping the hedge funds alive and keeping the bankers alive and keeping the stock market up. None of that has anything to do with what we eat and how we stay happy. And so unless we have something that will address the issues that are going to kill us down the road, then it's all for moot. And so I'd like to see something that helps people stay healthy. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
Two things. One, just when you said it has nothing to, stock market has nothing to do with it, absent alternative structures, and the history is such that the form much of the collapse takes is initially at that level. So there's an artificial notion that by somehow keeping that pumped up, you're forestalling the collapse. So it's not totally unrelated, but it's substantively unrelated. And I'd like to pick up, I meant to mention it earlier, the notion of Jubilee, which feels like such a breakthrough concept for this.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of people figuring out concretely what form could that take? What are the mechanisms whereby it could actually be realized in a modern context? What are the possible consequences? You know, what are the risks? What are the things you'd have to try to head off as problems, etc.? Is there some systematic work being done on that you could reference for us? And then thirdly, to the extent, just like public banking was a far-fetched notion nobody had ever heard of and remained a fairly technical question throughout the campaign. And yet in 4 years, we got public banking, the beginnings of it. We got the regulatory basis for it in California, and 23 other states are in different stages of taking it on. One person was elected governor with that as his platform. So it seems to me if we can both have a viable way of doing it and then a powerful, straightforward enough, not inaccurate, but comprehensible enough notion of it that it can become the rallying point for what we're asking for, that's not an impossible notion, it seems. So I'll stop there.
No, that's fine. And first, let me say that it's hard to start it's been hard for people to start formulating a plan about a debt jubilee, because the minute you start talking about debt jubilee, there's huge pushback from people who say, hey, I played by the rules, I don't have a lot of debt. That would punish me and benefit all these other people that were reckless and borrowed way too much money, and they've already spent it and we can't get it back. And so it's hard to even have a long conversation about it. One of the plans that I had heard was to give everybody a certain amount of money. And at the time, this was a couple of years ago, the amount they were talking about was $50,000, with the caveat that if you have debt, you have to use the $50,000 to pay off your debt. And if you don't have debt, then you get $50,000 to go spend. And so, you know, that was attempting to level the field and say, okay, if you were good and didn't have debt, here's a bonus. I think, you know, for me, part of the problem is the debt is unrepayable. It's unsustainable. I mean, just that one chart where the cumulative debt in the U.S. is 3 times our output. There's no way that's getting paid back. And historically, go ahead. Bob.
I don't know. I wouldn't want to interrupt you, but of course, people are talking about degrowth. The fact that the most likely outcome, if we're going to save the planet, is that we're going to have to cool off the economy, literally. It's kind of a difficult situation that it's what people are fearing right now, but in a positive sense, it's what we need to do. We need to get more people off the freeways and out of airports and things like that, and find a way to have some local emphasis that minimizes the things that are wasteful and not going to be helpful, and begin to start unloading the old baggage we don't need in the economy. I know that's as you say, when you bring a subject up and people say, hey, I worked all this time, I did this, I have that, I deserve to have. You know what? I'm afraid that's no longer a relevant point of view, I think. I mean, if we're really looking at surviving, if we're really looking at this being the first of maybe several serious things that we've dug up the earth to expose ourselves to diseases and stuff that we don't have a precedent for, we have to start realizing that there are some things that I like to say that we'd probably be happy to give up, but I understand that many of us are conditioned into, this is the only game I know. I'm not about to give it up if I don't have to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a good answer for that.
But I think, and this is, again, me just looking forward and kind of projecting and trying to see where this is going to go. What I worry about is there's going to be so many people out of a job without an income that it's not going to be their choice that they give up their debt. They're going to default on their debt. And so that will disrupt this economy in myriad ways. And that's what I'm afraid of. That's what I would like to have discussions about is, you know, this is going to disrupt the supply system. It's going to disrupt our food. You know, how are we going to feed ourselves 2 months from now? That's an operative question. We need to be having that discussion. And the debt thing can come later, but I really think it's going to be a moot point very quickly, having a discussion about debt jubilee, because I think by default so many people are going to default on their debt that it's, you know, it's going to be a de facto jubilee, if not a declared jubilee. But that leaves such carnage in our structures that we would be well placed to start thinking about how we're going to do food in 2 months.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of a thing. And you mentioned public banking. And so before we get too far or run into we still have 9 minutes, but Bob and Karen, are you familiar with public banking? Do you know what we're talking about?
A little bit, yeah.
I've heard of it a little, but
okay.
Yeah.
So public banking is where an entity, a government entity, sets up a bank, and they run all their own money through that bank. And so North Dakota is the famous example. They've had a public bank for over 100 years now. When North Dakota takes in tax money or fee money or anything like that, it goes into the North Dakota Bank. And so they have programs to loan that money, the state's money, out to local governments and things like that. And of course, because it's in-house, they don't have to charge, you know, large application fees. They're not for profit, you know, they're just there to funnel the money and control the money. A lot of people think when they hear public bank, they think of a publicly owned bank that individuals can go use. And that's not really what California approved. What California approved was for local governments, county and city, to get together and do a public bank for a neighborhood or for an area. Like we could do one for Santa Clara County, and all the cities in Santa Clara County could be a part of it. I want to point out that until 1967, the post office actually was able to cash checks and things like that. So the post office was a bank. I remember back in 2008 when there was questions about whether the banks could even survive. It was said at that point that for about $1.8 trillion, the US government could buy every bank in the country. Literally buy up their stock, buy their physical assets, you know, pay off the shareholders, and every bank would be owned by the government. And if that were the case, then again, we could get back to it's not for profit. We don't have to charge interest or very little. We could charge an application fee for the loan, and that's it. You know, we don't care about interest. We just want to get money moving and get people using it and make it accessible to everyone. And so there's lots of ways we could do it. I think having the conversation about a public bank is very useful because it presences there's other ways to do money. We don't have to do it the way we're doing it right now. And I think that if we get to a point where credit defaults are happening daily, right and left, millions of people, that's an opportunity to rethink how we do money. So. But I'm more worried. I get less excited about the political conversation because by the time we have a campaign, have elections in November, people get sworn in, and then they can actually do something, that's a year from now. I think we're going to have a lot of problems between here and a year from now that politics is not going to solve. And so I'm trying to keep the focus and keep the conversation on what can we do in the next couple of months? What conversations do we need to have? What direction do we want this to go? Because it's going to be in our face very soon. And that's just, again, my prediction. I could well be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, because it could get ugly. But we're starting to see news reports out of New York City that there's looting. So,
so you're thinking like food riots? I mean, we're going to have a major breakdown in that.
And for two reasons. One is with all the shutdowns and stuff, the transportation system that moves food around is struggling. So if you look at the trucking numbers, there's much reduced trucking going on, people driving trucks, people sick not driving trucks. I mean, there's all kinds of issues there. And then China was shut down for 2 months. They're just coming out of it. But so much of our stuff, 70% of the stuff we buy comes out of China. And so there is there's a bubble of air in the supply line coming out of China that within the next week or two is going to start making itself felt here. We're going to, the shelves.
When you say 70% of the stuff we buy comes out of China, how does that relate to the food supply in particular?
So we don't get as much of our food from China as we get other stuff, but we get, it happens to be 70% of all the stuff we bring in comes out of China. It also happens that we get 70% of our drugs from China, and China gets 25% of the precursors for the drugs that they manufacture for us from India. And India is now going into a lockdown. And so, you know, it's entirely feasible that, but the last 6 months of 2020, we're not going to have much in the way of drug supply. So
data that you're naming, Derek, I would love it if you could provide some sources. That sounds like very helpful information to have a handle on.
Let me suggest this, because yeah, I mean, I read so much stuff, and so much stuff goes through my email inbox. It's hard for me to go back and point to one thing. My process is, when I see something, I copy it down, and I usually write it down onto a little yellow sticky pad. And then at some point I sit down and transcribe that into a Word doc. And by touching it 3 different times like that, that helps put it in my head. But where it came from, I don't usually know. Usually you can just search 4 or 5 words that you're looking for and find all kinds of sources.
Right.
So if you're curious about how much trade do we get from China, you can just put that into a search engine and you'll get all kinds of sources.
I'm also interested in the process of going through your brain that landed a particular set of data, you know, the lines of inquiry you're following. But if it's not, I get it.
Okay. And what else? Well, I feel like I've been talking the whole time, and we've only got a few more minutes left. So
the food thing is really something I haven't quite, I mean, I sort of know intellectually overall that a lot of things can start having repercussions the longer we're all knocked out of jobs, work, actual work as opposed to jobs. Growing food is part of that. It's big agriculture mostly with poorly paid people, and we wouldn't probably have time to restructure that, but that's the direction we're going to end up having to go, is local food basically. And actually this particular area, the Santa Cruz area, the California in general, pretty blessed really. I mean, the land is here, the resources are here, but we have to have a real understanding about that with the people who are normally the producers. Again, I think there is such an opportunity to fundamentally change how we do things. And from what you're saying, at some point, it may just simply be obvious, but that sounds like the way you don't want to have to do things.
Right.
I think for it to get obvious, it would have to get really, really bad.
Yeah.
Because of the investment of people in
Yeah.
power, you know.
Yeah.
But you see, there's something about a city. By definition, a city cannot support itself. It has to go
Yeah.
out into the
Right. Yeah.
into the exterior, if you will, and bring resources in. And as long as people are willing to trade with you, that's fine. When they stop wanting to trade with you, that's where we start getting wars. Okay, well then we're going to go take it because you won't sell it to us.
Yeah.
And so that's been our way of doing things for thousands of years. And this is what, you know, I always used to say, one of the reasons I want to have a foot in Thailand is because I want to catch the last plane out when things go to shit in the US. Well, I've missed the last plane out because now I can't go into Thailand until the Thai government lets us. So, okay, we're being called. We've got a minute to go back into the main room. So we do have a minute. Any last thoughts, questions, concerns?
I'd just like to know, as you pose all those questions, what kinds of answers that you are stirring up, if you have any. I'm sorry, Karen, I cut you off.
It's okay. Go ahead.
I'm
No,
done.
Karen, I'll answer that question in the whole group. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I was just going to say something about having been in co-housing for a while and involved for a while, that I got interested in the idea of the commons, which is old, you know, but that comes in my mind as I'm listening to this. And it was kind of a revelation to me to realize that it was something that was common around the world a few hundred years ago. But
Enclosing the commons has been quite a movement.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so many resources that can.
That is so rude. We were cut off right in mid-conversation. Michelle, you're muted. There we go.
There, yeah. Tried to give everybody plenty of warning.
Well, you gave us a minute warning, and we used every second of it.
Every second, yeah.
And Karen didn't get to finish her sentence. Oh, I'm sorry.
All right. Here, Karen, do you want to drop something in here?
Oh, I was just, I was thinking a little bit about the image of the commons and from being in co-housing. And it's so small scale compared to the scale of what we're looking at in the country and the world. But to me, it's helpful to have as a model of where I'd like to be going, for that to become more widespread. And that idea that you have common resources, you don't have to own a bunch of things yourself and everyone can share them. And, you know, in this little community that I live in, there's even things like a unit has come up for rent and they will not rent it at the market value. They will rent it at an affordable value. And it's the same thing when we bought a unit in here. It was not sold at the price that you could get. So, you know, it's like there's this little other model that I've gotten to know about, and it helps me to project that out.
And somebody had mentioned worker-owned cooperatives. It makes so much more sense just from the point of view of if the workers are making the decisions about how things are made and what's done with the products that are made or the services that are provided, they're going to make sure that they're taken care of. And as opposed to a board of directors that meets in New York City and makes a decision about what pesticides are going to be used in California, it's not in their backyard, it's not going to affect their family, all those toxic chemicals, and so they'll make a worse decision. Rather than if they were personally involved in it, it was going to affect their family, they might make a different choice. And so having workers in the, you know, Richard Wolff says all the time, it's so funny, we pride ourselves on being a democracy, and yet we don't have democracy in the workplace.
Or in schools.
Or in schools. Or, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Yes, we're a so-called democracy in politics, and that's about the extent of it. It stops right there. And given corporate money in politics, I don't even think we have a democracy anymore. But
no,
that's my personal gripe. So Michelle, where did you want to go from here?
Well, we've got about 15 minutes left till our close. So it would be great if somebody thinks they can kind of summarize what happened in each of the rooms in about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll just do a quick go round. So who wants to summarize what happened in the room I was in? You'll note I am abdicating responsibility for this. So.
And I'll mention to Nancy, Nancy, you're frozen, so you might have a connection problem.
Anybody ready to go? Okay, hang on, Paul, there you go.
I thought we were kind of having a positive discussion about the opportunities that the pandemic opens, you know, by showing that business as usual can grind to a halt. The machine can indeed stop, by showing that we can change how we live dramatically and literally overnight. And also by showing that the government is capable of spending extraordinary amounts of money, just not on anything useful, but the argument that we can't spend money seems to me be gone. So the direction I thought our group was moving was sort of talking about what would it look like in the midst of this pandemic for people to reclaim some of their power, because that last stimulus bill was so bad. I think, you know, to me at least, it makes it very clear, and the people who aren't getting their unemployment checks are very clear, that if there's going to be a response to the pandemic that is in the public interest, the public will have to demand it. It is not going to form itself spontaneously in Congress. So I think I was asking, how can this become a time when we're empowering each other and realizing we have a shared vision?
I just realized I had forgotten to introduce to the rest of the group that Nightingale's significant other has joined us as well. You want to say hello to everybody here?
Hey everybody, I'm Nathan. I think I know at least over half of you from various points, and happy to be a part of the discussion. Just briefly to follow up on, I think, what Paul was saying. I think that what we're saying might need to happen, or asking questions about, can this happen? Will someone do this? It's just to say, yes, and we are doing it. So this is very serious. The stakes are now somewhat higher, because I think what would we say, the preseason is over, to use a sports analogy, and building from the bottom up, having real ties to each other and to the earth, and to organize at scale and to build a more just civilization. That's what we're talking about, and that's what we're going to do to the best of our ability and continue doing.
Nathan, I want to second that completely. But I'm always concerned about language. So I would say the season is over. It's playoff time.
Yes. The finals.
Yeah, this is the finals.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. So would somebody like to summarize the breakout room that I was in?
At it, maybe.
Go ahead, Bob.
I could make a little of a stab at it. Among some of the early issues we discussed about the economics of what's going on right now is worker ownership of businesses, because it's easy to anticipate a pretty big economic fall off, if not a collapse. And what's a way we can engage people to recreate an economy that has a chance at working, I think, at the local level. We discussed a moratorium on rent and mortgage, which a lot of people are discussing. It seems absolutely necessary to do something or something absolutely equivalent to it right now. So that has to be a part of what's happening. We discussed debt in terms of the Jubilee idea, where debt is forgiven. And we were thinking that our culture is such that there are going to be a large number of people who are going to definitely do some pushback on that, because they've been invested for very long on the terms of basically our debt-driven society. So that's an issue that led us to talk about the public banking, so that we start getting to, again, using ourselves and our own resources locally as best we can to pool them, to create the type of area we want to live in and the way we want to live in. I mentioned the term degrowth, which is the other thing that's kind of going unaddressed. Most people have talked about it, but that's another thing that's very threatening to a lot of people. But the fact is that I think, from what I understand, what we were talking about, it seems like our economic system is simply unsustainable. It depends on always having new resources. We're killing the planet doing it. This disease is a preview of what happens when everybody starts getting a hint about, well, you can't do that anymore. But it has to be something that's something important we could communicate to each other, is that there's more than this disease that we have to really start talking about, because things are going to change whether we're in charge of it or not. And Derek brought up the fact that our food is mostly mass produced and transported, and we could be looking at a couple of months of actual food shortages, which is something, I guess the Depression, people were hungry, a lot of people were hungry, but this is maybe a little different. It's so totally systemic, potentially. So, and I hadn't actually thought that seriously about, but that could be something that has it could be an effect much sooner than we have anticipated or have ever thought about it before. So that's kind of a big issue that goes back to trying to create a local sustainability in food. And this area, Santa Cruz area particularly, and I think California in general, has a real advantage resource-wise. But we all need a lot of help to make it work if we're going to find ourselves separated from what we are used to. And a conclusion I think we all agreed on in the group is that the debt that we're all going to owe or supposedly have to pay is simply unpayable. It's not going to be possible to, we're just simply going to have to restructure that part of the moneyed system. When the coronavirus lockdown is over, we're going to be confronted with these things from business and entrenched interest. And we're going to have to really work hard at talking to each other about, we know people have made sacrifices to create this economy, but it's unsustainable, and we have to have a way to forgive each other so we all get a fresh start. It sounds unconvincing when I say it to myself, so I know it's going to be a problem for a lot of people. And I don't know if anyone wants to jump in for.
Well, we're getting close to close time. So what I'd like to do is just have us, we've only got 5 minutes left here. So if you want to just give us 5 words or less, what are you inspired by, or what are you looking forward to as we emerge? I'll give everyone a moment to think of it, because I haven't got one yet. And I've unmuted everyone, so whoever wants to jump in, just start. Go ahead.
I got thinking, as people were talking, I got thinking back to my experience with unions. And here we are, this is a couple more words than 5, I apologize, but I think when we looked at the energy of the younger people, and their excitement about Bernie, regardless of who ends up candidate or whatever. Now that they have a new battle, which is they were the ones doing the grunt work in this economy. And it would be a great time for us to be the elders educating people about our history in this country, 80 years ago, and the power of collective bargaining.
All right. Power of collective bargaining sounds like a good one. Anyone else ready to go?
I was going to say, what gives me hope are young people who have been very politically active lately, who are taking serious hold of social discussions that are part of what our group talked about and what your group talked about. And as far as the young being for Bernie, it's so funny because in Santa Cruz, I thought, what about the old who are for Bernie? That seems to be a little underrepresented. But I think a lot of people of my era were quite ready to have a change. I don't understand. Well, I do understand what's wrong with a lot of the rest of the nation. But the young people and examples we have, the people who came up from Huntington or LA, where they're right next to oil refineries and stuff, and trying to do something about it really is very inspiring. And we do need to do something about it. And just local efforts here. I mean, I think people are in the mix, they're doing it. And there's hopefully will be things that almost anyone can look at and say, that seems like a good idea. I agree with that. If there's some way we can start talking more to each other, maybe outside of the groups we're most comfortable with about it, just sort of taking a stab at it. More than 5 words too, sorry.
And just to your last point, we got to invite more people into these kinds of conversations. And that's one of the great advantages. So what gives me hope is the machine halting, and people having time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is what gives me hope is that people are being forced into thinking about this. Granted, a lot of people are still doing the Netflix thing and the self-medication thing, but boy, I mean, we're not going to get another shot at this with everybody being frozen in place like they are right now.
I would say I wrote that down, using breakdown to, get to break through. In any case, that I found that really inspiring. I'd like to spend a little more time thinking about the things we can let go of, the things that we can say, we've discovered what we can let go of. And the other thing, I liked Paul's list for the next bill because it helps me to be specific and concrete. So even if it's just me trying to think about it by myself, I'd like to work on that.
New Deal. Because the impossible change, where the entire direction of government and politics and society and who matters and who doesn't, all of it changes so dramatically, so rapidly, and so much is accomplished, an entire 20th century infrastructure built in less than a decade. So the elders, I just want to pick up on what Francesca said. Those of us who are old enough or know enough history to know that, in fact, that happened, and that it is not unheard of for citizens to express themselves and be heard and have an effect on the life they share in common. We need to pitch in, because I talk to young activists all the time. They don't know that.
We have a short time of people having forced leisure and getting the conversations going. There the Green New Deal is one thing that's already in people's mind. If we could really work with the kind of complex, small scale organic structures and bring those in place. There's some things where large scale is useful, such as dealing with the basic structure of dealing with the virus, but dealing with regenerating a new economy, and Michelle talked about the agriculture, that needs to be complex, small groups working together organically. Maybe that can happen in the breakdown.
So aiming for the 5 words, understanding, restoring, and co-creating the conditions for communities to flourish worldwide. And those are non-human and human communities, present and future.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
So I think what I would say is what I've heard is mostly that it's almost like people are saying we need Bernie Sanders, and that is who is not the favorite right now. And so my aspiration would be that people think a little bit harder if what we're saying is representative of the greater community.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. People have to take it on themselves to carry this on. The issues are what should matter. And he's changed the political discourse, Bernie has. He just happened to be the right guy at the right time to do that. And it's up to us to take it seriously as far as we can and keep the pressure on whoever's elected. I mean, I hope it's not whoever's elected, but anyway.
Oh, and we lost Nancy just before she got her chance to chime in. She said her phone battery was dying. So we're past our end time, so I'd like to give us a moment to kind of close out. And I was reminded in the call this morning that that I should do something a little more specific with that. So let me just take you there. Oh, now the share is working. There we go. So again, a quick reminder, let's bring more people into this, because maybe it's just my preference, but I like having breakout rooms with smaller conversations so that you get to go deep, but then really having a variety of voices in the room. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are people who need this, and that this is a way for people to start feeling engaged and empowered. So please bring people in. And then the other thing that is true is this needs to be supported. This is not going to be sustainable for much longer without some support. And some of that is financial, but some of it is also interpersonal, people who can help out with things. And we'll be putting together some ideas about that. And anybody who's interested and willing to help out with things, we can train you up on what you might need to do that. And that this is what motivates the organization Nova Sutras, is really taking our cues from the greater living world And I think a lot of people are ready to step into this, and we just want to give them the opportunity to be of service to these kinds of ideas. So finally, to close us out, again, it's fun. Let's hold hands if we can do that. And and just take a moment and really settle in and feel all of the brilliance and compassion and just delightfulness of all of the people who've come together tonight. It's so wonderful to be with all of you. Thank you all so much. And we can leave the room open for a little bit if we want to keep talking.